after me. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Keeping the palms joined. Put palms down. All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Nice to see you all here today. Just want to ask you all to take a moment and just kind of ask yourself, when was the last time you paused and reflected on the fact that your life is pretty darn good? That's it. Just reflect on the fact for a moment that your life is pretty darn good. That's probably an incredible understatement. But again, for those who are maybe just coming in now, the question is to just pause for a moment and ask yourself, or recognize, and how often do you stop to recognize that your life is pretty darn good? And just sit with that for a few minutes as I scan around the room and force everybody not to stare at me. Your life is pretty good. It's actually probably phenomenal. So just think about that for a minute. So, is there anyone in this room that disagreed with the fact that your life is pretty darn good? I mean, if there is, let me know. If anyone wants to just share why your life is not pretty darn good, we have a whole hour for you to try to convince us why your life isn't good. And I will gladly give you the floor for an hour to try to convince the rest of us that your life is not so good. So again, for those who maybe just came in, the question was, I don't even remember the question anymore, how I phrased it, but just sit and recognize that your life is pretty darn good. Now I want to ask you to ask yourself, already, I mean, it's only 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning. How many times did you complain about something today already? Truly. Ask yourself how often or how many times you complained about something already this morning at Saturday at 11 o'clock. there anyone in here that didn't complain about anything? I mean, it's possible. It's only 11 o'clock. Maybe you woke up at 10:42 and just crawled out of bed and got here. But is there anyone who did not complain, either in your mind or expressed somehow, about anything already this morning? And we covered honesty last week, so sorry. This practice is that simple. All the Buddhist terms, all the meditations in the world, all the books about Buddhism come down to, in my practice, exactly what I just said. And that's it. Now we'll spend the next hour doing your meditation, so we can check it off and say, I did my meditation. We'll talk about Buddhist stuff to put it into terms that make it seem like it's some big thing. I did my Buddhist thing. But again, for those who just came in, how often do you stop and recognize your life is pretty darn good? And at 11 o'clock already on a Saturday morning, how much have you complained already? This is practice. That's it. If you want to learn about Buddhism, spend the next 6 months doing that practice I just gave you every single day. This is how you integrate practice into your lives. You know, I often say that, and for those who've been around me a long time, that I don't typically lead the way I think, because the amount of people I often think that show up would trickle down to about a handful, because the rest of you would finally understand that I really am just an asshole. But at least those 5 would have a deep practice. It's really challenging after 17 years of running a temple like this and 20 years literally of focused on building Buddhism in like this area for 20 years. And see how often people miss what practice actually is. Just completely miss it. And I don't blame you. I actually blame all the people, myself included, that lead. I blame what Western culture has done to Buddhism. I blame media and capitalism. I blame a lot of things for why it is that way. But it doesn't mean that after 20 years I should look at, maybe we should share this differently. Maybe the 5 people who deeply practice would have a greater impact than the 50 people who just want to talk. This is the kind of stuff that I sit up here and think week in and week out and typically don't say. And in my opinion, it's usually the best stuff to say. Because it, to me, reminds me of how I was taught, which says you need to be called out on your own crap. But in a way and in a place where you're also being supported and not scolded. You're being reminded and not belittled. You're being cared for and not judged or critiqued. So these aren't judgments. These aren't critiques. Well, they're kind of critiques. They're critiques of the way of practice, but they're not critiques of you as individuals. Because believe me, the moment we're done here and you all leave, don't take this the wrong way, but I got enough stuff to think about. I'm not thinking about you all, right? So these are not attacks at you as individuals. These are thoughts on how do you actually practice? And Western culture with Buddhist stuff, man, it's become a mess. It really has. And as usual, the ones that, are leading the way are the ones that are the largest with the most money. And then they can just kind of do it how they want. And then that sets the tone for what people think Buddhism is. And it's sad. It's really sad. So for me, I think as 20 years in, it's a reminder to just come back to what is the actual practice? And are you running a temple that is actually practicing Buddhism? Or are you running a temple that's just a community center bringing a bunch of people together to talk about stuff? And to gossip and slander and be lazy and rush through everything? And that's the kind of temple I want to run. We've done pretty well so far, but I'm excited for the next 20 years, if I make it that long. Because I think that's where this place will really begin to take root. But it all comes back to the same two questions, which again, I don't remember either of them anymore, but I think they were pretty important. Right? How often do you recognize that your life is pretty darn good? And how often do you complain? And as the Buddha taught very clearly, all suffering. This is not Jeff just making shit up. I mean, it is, but all suffering comes from the nature of your mind. That's it. That's your suffering. So if you don't begin to become aware of that, and point fingers and point blame and carry hatred and anger your whole life, then you're always going to be blaming others for your suffering. All suffering comes from the nature of your mind. This is the Buddhist teaching. So, I'm laughing because about 7 minutes ago, somebody on here said, audio has some issues today, just wanted you to know, so. Yeah. Maybe that was just for us here. Tends to work that way. It's funny, last thing I'll say before we sit is, and I'm not using this as a metaphor to what I just shared, but it to me reminds me of the same thing, in that when the Buddha awakened, right, and again, I just want to be very clear for those who don't know me, this is not me saying, I have awakened and here's my message for you today, at all. But the teaching is that when the Buddha awakened, he realized that the depth of his knowledge and his understanding, nobody was going to understand. And he actually didn't want to go teach it because he didn't think people would get it. He didn't think people would do it. He didn't think people would practice it. And the story is that Brahma, the Hindu god, came down and, as it said to Siddhartha, the Buddha, that there are people with little dust in their eye. Go teach. So for me, this practice and these teachings, they are for the people with little dust in their eye. They're not for the people that still just want to say, well, I don't think, but what about this? Buddha taught, have doubt to an extent, but also have faith in the practice. But if you spend all of your time using your ego to try to drive holes in all of the teaching that you've ever learned, maybe the problem isn't the teachings. Just throwing that out there, right? And for someone who runs Buddhist groups a lot, I hear that constantly. Sorry, you probably thought we were going to sit right away. I hear that a lot, where people are like, well, this, and there's lots of beautiful teachings out there. But that's not Buddhism. And it doesn't mean Buddhism is the only way or the way. It is one way. But if you're going to explore Buddhism, then to me, you might as well explore Buddhism. And Buddhism is, to me, really meant to, at its depth, to be practiced by those who have little dust in their eye, because otherwise they're just not ready for it. And that's okay. Right? Nobody on the street corner waving you in with a flag that says, yo, Buddhism over here. Right? Buddhists don't care about that stuff. You'll get there when you get there. So, all right, with that, we'll sit. If you want to, you're good. A few things I'll tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. Your mind races all day long. It's not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice. We're just going to sit and breathe. Find a posture that's comfortable. If you're on a cushion, sliding to the front third often helps. That will guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. Starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath. we'll use the rest of our time this morning for questions. Meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with.
I've been thinking about emptiness a lot, and you did come to some conclusions about it. We think about emptiness as some sort of esoteric thing, but I discovered it's more emptying your mind so you won't. That isn't the right word. So when you start thinking about something, if you see a car and say it's beautiful, the next thing that happens is just, boy, it would be nice to have that car. And when you start saying that, and that leads into suffering, I want that car. And emptiness has a lot to do with just releasing it and letting it go.
So I think what you're talking about is a really beautiful practice, but it's not emptiness.
It's not what?
It's not emptiness, what you're talking about. What? Hang on. What you're talking about is a beautiful practice to go beyond duality and to not label things as good or bad, right or wrong, beautiful or not beautiful. But emptiness, the one thing specifically that caused me concern with what you said is you said emptiness is emptying your mind. That has nothing to do with emptiness. Emptiness is actually what makes everything possible.
Keep on.
Huh?
Go on.
I was going to tell you to keep reading.
No.
Yeah. But like I said, what you described, you started talking about emptiness, and then you went into the practice of seeing something like a car that you think is beautiful. And then the craving and desire for that car kicks in. Absolutely. This is what happens with the dualistic mind that says, that's a beautiful car. I want that car. What do I have to do to get that car? And then we begin to alter things to try to get that car. Recognizing, what does a car do? It gets you somewhere. What it looks like is irrelevant. And this is coming from a guy who the last thing, well, other than my baseball cards and photos, the last thing that I held on to was my precious little Mustang. So I understand the attachment to the car. But the attachment had nothing to do with the car. It was attachment to the ego that was fed by the car. Because, huh?
I was trying to say that.
So the practice is to see things for what they are. Dependent origination, pratitya samupata, how they function in our lives. That's all cars are. I mean, the car example is a very practical, perfect one because obviously I didn't always have this view. I was as wrapped up in it as we all are. But it still just blows my mind that you go onto a car lot and there is in essence the exact same car. Like just pick one car dealer. You go to that lot. There is like the exact same car 1,000 different ways. A button that turns this way or that way. This shade of this color or that shade. I mean, it's just endless. The rims that look like this or like this. Like 1,000 different ways. feeding into our being stuck in thinking that these things actually matter. I'm not talking about safety. I'm talking about the way things look. So cutting through all of that is incredibly important. But again, that's not specifically emptiness. Emptiness makes everything possible. What else?
How does emptiness make everything possible?
How does that
How
emptiness?
does emptiness make everything possible?
Well, think of a cup, for example. Do you drink coffee or tea? Yeah, which one? Okay, I just wanted to know which one to use. What do you prefer? Why do you prefer coffee? What's wrong with tea?
It gives me stomach ache.
Well, there you go. How come you don't want stomach aches? It's uncomfortable. What does the Buddha say life is filled with?
Suffering.
Discomfort. So you crave coffee because you don't want a stomach ache. But you said you like both. So if tea's the one that gives you stomach ache, then why would you drink it?
Well, it's kind of a lot to get into, but it doesn't matter. I can drink.
Why do you think it doesn't matter?
Well, because I can drink tea in the middle of the day, but not in the morning. So I drink coffee in the morning and tea in the middle of the day.
Okay. Emptiness makes all that possible. I was going to go with the simple example, but as you spoke more, it became easier to use that example. But when you have a coffee or a teacup, it starts out what? Empty. And then what do you put in it? Whatever you want. That's how emptiness makes everything possible.
Let's go back to where you started today, recognizing kind of how awesome my life is, which I'm a lot better about doing recently, but
Yeah.
it's uncomfortable because it triggers these storylines around my own privilege and my not being deserving, taking pleasure when which then triggers storylines about what I should be doing for others, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess the real work as I'm seeing it is just sitting with those emotions and letting the storylines go.
Or doing things for others.
Yes, yeah, but not to scratch the itch of my own shame.
Yeah. So, and you've heard me, I know, talk about this a lot. Privilege for me is very real, right? I sit here in all of my privilege, right? As a white male, right? Heterosexual, able-bodied individual. Every privilege in the book. It's very real.
Yeah.
And it shapes my life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to roam down the street. And you know where I really started to understand, like deeply connect with understanding privilege? It's really only going back 8-9 years when I started to really look at it. Spend enough time working with 20-year-olds, college kids, and you'll drastically change, for me, old white person thinking, old white man thinking, drastically. And I don't ever have to walk down the street day or night and feel afraid because of who and how I am. It doesn't mean something couldn't still happen to me. But all the privileges I have protect me from that. I'm not the target. With that being said, it doesn't help. Nor do I roam around and feel ashamed of my privilege. Meaning, I'm part of what created it, and I'm part of what can work to dismantle it. But I personally didn't, like Jeff, didn't create all of privilege in all of society and all of civilizations for millions of years. I made peace of it. And feeling shame about it is worthless. Worthless meaning it doesn't accomplish anything other than make you feel like crap. So how can you use your privilege?
I think more specifically what I was thinking of today is what's happening in Israel and Gaza, and how indulgent it feels to me to sit and appreciate my life and feel good about things. And what I want to avoid is the storyline of, well, I need to go do stuff directly related to that. What I really need to do is focus on, forget about what I need to do.
Yeah.
There's many things I can do that are good for others that are not directly related to what's happening
Right.
in a particular situation.
Yeah, I mean, I often, and I didn't today, and it's something I really should stop doing, when I talk about privilege, I often then say, and I'm Jewish, and we're considered the chosen ones, and I kind of, in my joking Jewish way, throw that in as a privilege, which I felt totally inappropriate saying today because of everything that's going on. But at the same time, with everything that's going on in the Middle East, I can't blame myself. And if I want to do things to create change, then I have to do things to create change. But ultimately, what I'm hearing you say, and what it always is for you, is you just got too many stories in your head of all this shit that isn't real. And, 10 days ago, right, a week ago, more specifically, probably whatever the exact, right? So a week ago, the questions around Israel and Gaza wouldn't have come up. Now those are the questions. But 7, 8 days ago, the questions were around something else. So it's very easy for us to say, well, that's going on. So how am I supposed to feel okay with myself?
Yeah.
There was something else to put that at a week ago. And there's always going to be something else to put that at. And believe me, I'm not minimizing what's going on. I'm just saying that I've watched for years and years and years people say, well, because of that, this is hard for me. Because it's always something that we're going to point and say, well, because of that, how dare I feel happy and safe? Please feel happy and safe. Please appreciate that, to our knowledge, nobody is bombing us right now. That's not something, in my view, from practice, to feel guilty about. And that's, knowing you well enough, I can say this, that's your shit.
Yeah.
You feel guilty about all the good things in your life. And you ruin your life because of the guilt you feel. Huh?
It's not going that far.
Let me rephrase that. You try to ruin your life because of the guilt you feel for being fortunate and privileged. Now you're suffering.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
And there's less I can do to help others as a result.
And because of the fact that you're suffering, there's less you can do to help others because you're too focused on, oh, poor me. I'm so privileged and fortunate. My life really sucks. So, yeah, continue to recognize it. It's all I will share. Continue to be aware of it. Continue to try to figure out ways to drop the storylines. And truly, for me, one of the best ways to get out of that is by just, as you know, doing what you can to help others. Right? And it doesn't mean you have to be over there right now. There are people right here in this room and in this community that are suffering for various reasons tied to what's going on. And there are ways to get involved and there are ways to help. Put your energy and focus there. Use the comfort and safety and privilege that you have in your life. Thanks. What else?
So Thank you for that, in the beginning when you said that people have dust in their eyes. Because since I've been coming here, I think what's helped me is being able to articulate a little bit more and label a little bit more what I've been trying to do in life. And so, again, I'm not there, I'm practicing. And just saying I'm practicing is something I learned here, right? I've never said that before. I would have said I'm a sinner and I go for forgiveness, right? So now I'm practicing. And I think part of what I'm learning is maybe I'm being too selfish to say, I hope that I have dust in my eye. Though I think there are probably times where there's a landslide of mud in my view that I'm not seeing, but I think that that's happening less and less for me. So I think I do have dust in my eye, and I think related to what we've just been talking about is I'm okay with that dust. I'm not looking, and and at this very moment I'm thinking, I don't really want to be awakened. In that, you know, I'm okay with what I'm doing, what I'm practicing, and maybe in my afterlife, or if there is another life, maybe then I'll be more open to seeking awakeness. I'm okay with just being helpful and making mistakes of not being helpful and saying the wrong things. And it's just triggered with this conversation here. It just triggered. I try not to beat myself up too much, though that happens. But that was helpful to kind of make me remember this dust in my eye. It's not that I can't see, but I'm kind of okay with that.
Well, Frank, I hate to break it to you, but that's the most awakened thing you've ever said. So you might want to slow down a little bit and stop showing up, or you're going to get there sooner than you know it. Yeah, I think. I mean, what you said really, I pondered, not even responding at all, because it was just a share that's really beautiful. But I think that I will say, for all of our benefit, is on a personal level, yes, it's wonderful that you're okay with that. And from a practice perspective, ultimately, whether we're okay with it or not kind of falls away. And what matters is the recognition of what you're sharing. So there's the reality that we will all very often kind of justify or kind of put a label on where we are on our spiritual journey and whether we're okay or not okay with it. But again, most important is, to your comment, similar to Justin as well, is that becoming aware of where you're at is the beautiful part. And definitely also the mud in our eyes. Some days it seems like there's a little dust, and some days it seems like a landslide for sure. So thanks. What else?
Maybe it was my imagination, but I realized through today's meditation you didn't speak. Was that just me?
There's just a sound issue going on with the technology, so that's why you didn't hear it.
Which was great. Thank you for not.
Thank technology. I mean, I talk about I said it at the beginning today very loosely, and I say this a lot, but my personal practice is silence, and the dust in my eyes. I don't like people talking during meditation. I want silence, and yet for all these years, I've been leading meditation while talking, and I do that, and I will continue to do that because for those who are newer, it often tends to help as a guide and, things like that. But, very often at times, and again, just because that's my personal practice doesn't make it right, but very often at times I think what this world, these people, what we all need more than anything is just silence. And so I felt like that was what was necessary and needed, especially after everything I said when we started, this morning. Which, by the way, it still cracks me up because I'm not like in the office like brainstorming, what am I going to talk about today? I mean, I had no idea as always, sitting down, and I just like started talking. And then after I say stuff, I'm like, where did that even come from? But obviously it came from the heart and mind, and that's what's present, And then following that, I didn't feel like talking at all during the meditation. So thanks for acknowledging that and allowing me to, to respond with a little more insight into that. But I do think with it's what's going on right now. And sadly, unfortunately, there will always be what's going on right now. But with what's going on right now, I do believe that the more silence you can get right now is important. The media, the social media, the news, the conversations, do not tune it out. It is there, it is real, it is happening. But in all of this heavy, deep, traumatic, emotional times that we're in, please give yourself some silence to try to balance isn't even the right word, but to just try to create space to sit and just come back to breath and heart and silence, because the mind and the heart is just being like destroyed and crushed right now. It truly is. And like I said, sadly, it will continue in some other way, in some other form, in some other place, as it always has. So, try to create space to just sit and be silent. Anything else before we wrap up here? Do one more comment if anyone's a question, if anyone's sitting on anything.
Recently I've been thinking about changing language because I realized how powerful it is.
Mm.
And earlier someone said, if I'm this way, this is okay. And if this happens, this is okay. I've been more striving towards, if this happens, then this happens. If this doesn't happen, this doesn't happen. That's what I found. If you say, if you're okay with something, then there's still some side of you that isn't okay with it. So I want to know what language changes you've made, I guess unconsciously or consciously, that you found helpful.
So through the first half of everything you just said, I thought you were talking about learning another language. Which in some ways what you're asking about is the same thing, but I thought you meant like, a different spoken language, which in essence this is the same way. I think that, even in what you said, your question or comment was, if this happened, then this happens. If this doesn't happen, then this doesn't happen. If this happens, and this doesn't happen. If this doesn't happen, this doesn't happen, and this happens. And neither this or that happen. What you're asking about is the Diamond Sutra. I understand your question was, what changes have I made in the way I speak as a practitioner? Is really the heart of your question, but what changes I have made or haven't made are really irrelevant. The question is, as you study the Diamond Sutra, what changes will you make that will alter the way you speak? And as you continue on that, in 6 months, you can let us all know. We will all ask Anthony 6 months from now what ways you have changed the way you speak based on what you studied. Yeah, but or I'll just let that entire body of what I just said be the example of the answer to the question that you wanted. Okay. So on that moment of clarity, we're going to join palms. May the benefit of this practice be transferred to all beings in all directions. May all be at peace. May all be free from suffering. And may the greed, anger, and ignorance that is causing all the pain and suffering in this world right now come to an end. So all may be at peace and all may be free from suffering.